All right, so we're here today with Kendall Yonemoto, who I was first introduced to by Jerry Ramajita, who we saw in the previous episodes of 8 Weeks Out. And really, the thing that I really appreciated from Kendall was just his use of medicine balls in a way that most people don't, and how he can attest to some of the stuff he's been using it. And really what he's going to do today and over the next couple episodes is show us not just how to use medicine balls to improve explosive power, but really how to understand the principles behind the movements to really translate into a variety of different sports. You know, baseball, soccer, tennis, golf, MMA. I mean, there's so many sports that have rotational and explosive components. And so I'll let Kendall give you a bit about his background, but it's some really exciting stuff, so I'm glad he came on the show.
Yeah, my background, thanks Joel. My background's in golf. I mean, I started out as a golfer, and partway through my career, because I was experiencing injuries, I actually met a massage therapist, a registered massage therapist who was also a world-class track coach. So I trained track and field with a group of sprinters for about 6 years. So for 6 years, 8 months a year, 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, I ran track. And it was a really interesting experience for me because when I went out and trained with the track and field athletes, I realized they trained with a small number of principles. They really ingrained fundamentals. And what I started to learn was that they were very sure of their technique, and it was always principle-based. So with all the reps that we got, I started to realize that golfers don't have that same certainty. But then when we started using med balls with athletes from different sports, I realized that the principles transferred over. So the book I wrote, The Athletic Fundamentals of Golf, we talk about several principles, and they do apply to golf, but they do apply to other sports as well, because they're just in general movement patterns and training of movement patterns.
Yeah, so today, and over the next couple of weeks, Kendall's going to go over some of those basic principles, and really I think you'll see the value in how to really apply them into not just golf, of course, but really any other sport. I mean, I think there's useful in just about any sport out there, really.
Yeah, we found it works pretty well. So should we?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Let's talk about some of the principles. So we have 8 athletic principles of movement, and just to go over the first 3, just to give you guys an idea. The first principle is midline. I'm strong and balanced with my hands on my midline. When I hold something in the middle of my body, I've got the most power. The second principle is center of gravity control. So I'm looking for a short lever length. If I can hold something close to my body, I can control it. The further away it gets, I can't control it. So I'd like to have it on my midline, close to my center of gravity. If I want a bit more control, I can lower my center of gravity. So those 2 principles, midline and center of gravity control, if I have those 2, I have physical advantage. That's what I call it. And if I can move in physical advantage all the time, it doesn't matter if I'm fighting, throwing, hitting, I'm going to be able to control my movements pretty well. So we'll do an introductory exercise. So Howie, I'll give you that ball. I'll grab another different ball. And we'll just do something that we call med ball big circles. So what this is about is actually moving with physical advantage. So I'll do it sideways, facing that way, and Howie can actually do it facing camera. So what it looks like is this. We're going to start with the med ball up. We'll go to the right, and I've got it on my midline, and actually this is close to my center of gravity. I'm going to move it slowly over to the side, let my arms come down to shoulder height. And because I don't have center of gravity control there, now I do. I've got it on midline. I'm lowering my center of gravity for control. My knees are rotating in a biomechanically functional pattern. I've got a lot of force off the ground, using my lower body, keeping on a midline all the time, moving it back to the top. So it doesn't look like much, but you can feel you're working with your lower body.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot more challenging than it looks. You start to feel a lot more spots activating and working, then you're not just making a big circle.
Well, when we work with athletes, a lot of times we'll get them to do 6 reps of that, and you're sort of welcoming them to their lower body because they've never really used their legs like that before. So let's do another one that's sort of more characteristic of like a speed athlete, and it's the big bounce. So I'll demo it.
Okay.
And the difference between just speed athletes and regular people is that speed athletes will always try to do something very explosively. So instead of doing this, instead of moving slowly, if there was a weight on the ground, I'd pick it up, boom, really explosively. Normal people just tend to try to fight the resistance and gradually make an adjustment. So I'm going to go from 0 to 100%, just like this, to train in that speed component. And I'm using my pelvis to control my head. So we've got to work within principles, and we're trying to make sure that we're moving in a biomechanically correct fashion.
Let's have Howie demonstrate that one.
Go ahead,
Let's have
Howie.
Howie. Let's see if he's got it down yet.
See if he's got it down. He's had a couple of reps to practice. Pretty good. It's getting better. Now, it's counterintuitive for a lot of people, like we said, to throw a ball down and not bend over or actually stand up. The tendency is to do this. That's a tendency. It's counterintuitive to actually use the pelvis going forward, but that's Olympic lifting.
I mean,
That's
it's wrestling. It's
wrestling. If you're trying to hit somebody, hand on midline, and I'm actually not punching so much as I'm actually jumping in, and I'm using as much physical advantage as I can.
Yeah, that explosive, hip extension is such a key movement in so many different sports. I think just using a medicine ball to drill that movement in, it's got a ton of uses, especially in combat sports and baseball and.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, we kind of have our own niche of where it is, and it's making me rethink a lot of things of different ways to incorporate those principles in the training. So it's definitely has huge carryover.
Yeah, so I know next week we're going to talk about a couple more principles, maybe give them a little segue to what they're
Next week we're going to go over the balance of the principles, just to give you an idea of how it progresses. The first three are all about gaining physical advantage. The next principles are about learning how to building on those three, and really talking about how to generate some more explosive power.
I mean, like I said, the biggest thing I really like about your stuff is just using the principles of movement through the medicine balls. The medicine ball is just a tool to develop the movement pattern and develop, the technique that'll carry over in so many sports. I think so many people just use medicine balls, myself, including that, it's just like an exercise or just another drill. But I think really what's unique about your system is using the medicine ball as a tool to develop the movement, which is going to carry over into so many more aspects.
Now, I'll go through the other principles because there's 8 in the book that I wrote, so the 8 athletic principles of movement. The fourth principle is gathering. So whenever I gather something, I want to gather it on my midline, close to my center of gravity. I actually have a few other principles. We've got centripetal force, which is acceleration around a fixed axis. We have the heavy point, which is the greatest speed in the arc when I'm throwing it, and ground reactive force. And all of those need to be integrated. So integration is the last principle. So what we'll do is, rather than talking about it, because it's better to have like an intuitive feel of it rather than just a scientific understanding of it, we'll just show you an exercise. So what we're going to do is do this throw off the wall that helps people understand, and I'll demo it because this is my nature to teach, and how we can actually just get a visual cue. We won't hit the thermostat. So
crush it.
So I'm going to move out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm throwing the ball. I'm using the principle of gathering. So I'm gathering it, getting it close to my midline. I've got physical advantage now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower, so I have more center of gravity control. I'm going to actually get ground reactive force by lowering. I'm striding. I've got good control of my center of gravity, and then I can actually use the ground for force. So as I throw it, I gather it, I get my position, and then I'm able to control the throw really well. So how he's going to do it, because he can do it left hand. Well, you're going to go right or left-handed?
Lefty.
Okay, let's go lefty.
Left-handers.
Gather it. Yeah, take your time. Load, and then throw. There you go. So now what he's able to do is he's taking a movement and just using principles, really trying to always gain physical advantage, use the ground for force, and now he can use his legs to power the throw, so it's not just an upper body throw. So if that was translated into say a punch or a strike, getting lower and then being able to keep it close to midline, maintaining that physical advantage when you're moving.
Let's see it again.
One more time?
One more time. We'll give him a second shot or retake. There you go.
What I like too is just the drive off the back foot and really propelling yourself forward by driving off the back foot and not just trying to use upper body to throw the whole thing.
I think the great thing, excuse me, is you get instant feedback. You can tell if you use your arms to push it off and you have no power off the ground, or you can tell when you do it right, when it just kind of clicks. And I think that's very, in whatever sports you do, you know when you do it right.
Right.
Well, this is a way to ingrain that feeling.
And typically athletes don't need to be told when they're doing it right. They can feel when they're doing it right. So what I'll do is I'll just do another version of it. if you're using principles, your movement can become really efficient. So if I throw it, catch it, turn back, I can use the same principle and do it left-handed, although I'm not left-handed. Because I'm using my legs and I'm using my midline, it's not really an upper body thing. I don't have to have that eye-hand coordination. I just stick to my principles and I'm able to move and generate power because I know most of my power and control is actually coming from having something on my midline and generating power with my legs.
Yeah, I think that's really the biggest difference you see between guys who can hit hard and guys that can't. It's the guys that hit hard know how to use their hips, their legs, and drive through and actually put more of their total body into it versus guys that just want to arm punch all day long.
Yeah, and your legs are always going to outlast your arms.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, what do we got to expect next week? We're going to have you back once more.
Next week, we're going to go over an explosive sort of power training exercise, and we'll show you how to sequence movement for different kind of skill sports.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. I think you can really see the carryover between combat sports and just learning how to rotate, through the hips, through the lower body, keep the center of gravity. That's something that all the fighters work on through their training, but being able to take the medicine ball and get the feedback, I think is a great tool.
So what we've talked about is the use of principles in coaching, and I think it's really important to be able to use a simple set of principles to coach any sort of athletic movement. If you don't work on fundamentals and principles, what happens is a lot of people get caught up teaching compensations. Compensations for a lot of are going to be infinite, whereas principles and fundamentals are finite. So what we have to do is, what I've had to figure out is how to strategize and how to introduce new concepts to students. So the power throw that we're going to do evolved a couple of, after I had problem clients. So my solutions are really client driven. So what we're going to do is just get Howie to do the power throw. He's already seen me do it a couple times. Usually what I'll do is I'll demonstrate and have the student or the client actually go through it, but he's seen it, so I'm just going to let him roll here. Do it in rhythm. Great. Okay, so we've got somebody like Howie who's obviously very athletic, and he's able to move and take an exercise that I might demonstrate for him and reproduce it just based on his ability to copy. Now, fundamentally, what I want to make sure is that it's very solid so that he's not getting lucky. I want him to be fundamentally really sound. So what we've got to do is dial it back. Even though he does it well, I want to make sure he's understanding the principles that he's using. So what we do is we teach this movement. Because some people aren't as athletic, we break it down. And we break it down sort of similar to scales, musical scales. So if you have a 6-note song, like this is a 6-note power throw that we're going to talk about, the notes have to be played in order. Sequencing, and that's what we're doing, sequencing a throw or a hit. Sequencing implies two things. It implies events and it implies order. Now if you've got 6 notes of a popular song and you play the 6 notes, everybody recognizes it, and it's great if you play it in rhythm. If you don't play the 6 notes, they're not enough or they're in a different order. It's not your version of the song, it's just a different tune altogether. So what we're trying to do is make that stable, and the notes themselves are dictated by the principles. We want Howie to get alignment with his midline, load his lower body, keep physical advantage, and be able to release it. So let's do the 6-note power throw. Okay, so Howie's going to start in a double leg stance, ball on midline. That's the first note. Second note, he's going to cross over. Third note's a single leg stance, loading his back leg. Fourth note, he lowers for center of gravity control, stride to give himself a place to go, and then throw. Great. So he should be able to break this movement down. That's sequencing, that's coordinated movement, and any sort of exercise, you should be able to break it down into components based on the principles. So how he's going to have is a lot of certainty about how he's going to move. So whether it's delivering a shot, throwing something on target, you need to be able to understand the principles and how you're going to generate force and how it's going to be consistent. So it's going to give stability to your skill set.
Yeah, it makes sense. I know Howie's been using some of these principles and applying it into your own training. That's something you probably wish you'd have had a few years ago. When you
well, 100%, and it's just another way to get proper reps and teaching the proper movement patterns. And the one thing, like you said, is with all the compensation, through time, and the more and more we do something, if we're doing it with with not proper mechanics or not being the most efficient, we're going to work our way around it to try to succeed. And we want to maximize everything, and this is a great tool to reinforce that.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe give them just a couple ideas of sets, reps? Like, how would you incorporate some of this med ball stuff into the training of most athletes? I know it's individual, of course, but what are some general guidelines of how they can start using this stuff today?
Exactly. Well, any team sport, like you said, is individual, so you've got to take the individuals into account. But the general things you're looking at is once you've sort of qualified the people on their age, their physical ability, their current level of conditioning, how long they've been in a sport, what we'll tend to do is, because there's skill exercises, we'll introduce them and see at what level they can do them. Now, the lucky thing is most people's technique isn't great, so they can't get a lot in, so they're not going to do a lot of reps wrong. But as we get going and as they do more exercises, they'll build up the capacity. So like with an exercise like this is fairly explosive. This is almost like a strength exercise or power exercise. So it's going to be 6 to 8 reps with a shorter number of sets because it's asking a lot. Some of the other less intense exercises we'll do quite a few more reps of. But for these ones specifically, you're going to probably start with 3 or 4 reps because it's almost like a maximum strength exercise. And then you're going to take full recovery in between. So, and you can do it at a less intensity. You're not going to throw it as hard. And when you're doing that 6-note throw, then you don't have to throw it quite as hard. So you can actually work through them. There's a number of different ways you can use the exercises to manage the volume and the intensity. So you've got to take all those individual factors into consideration, but there's a way of using the exercises to limit how much work a person's going to do.
Yeah, man, I think the other thing too is you could use them, kind of a dynamic warm-up to really get everything moving, get your patterns firing, get everything loose, get everything working, and then you can get into your workout, or you can incorporate them in. I mean, there's, like you said, I think there's a lot of different ways you can use them.
Exactly. Like we use because if throws are in a progression, we actually do use it as a dynamic sort of functional screen for sports and power. If people can't do the exercises, then we know that they're going to have power. And we say if the movement doesn't change, so we don't expect the skill-related movement to change either. So we try to change the fundamental movement first, give the athletes a concept of what they're trying to do, and then they're fully engaged mentally and physically when they're going at it. And then there's a psychological part too. Obviously, it's going to be frustrating if they're not good at it. So the test for determination and motivation is to actually get them to do it properly even when they're not good at it. And that mental toughness is built through the reps, even when you're not good at something.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And like I said, this is great stuff. I've really enjoyed learning from Kendall. I know Howie has as well. And so we've taken some of his time to put together a video course. We got a lot of emails and a lot of interest in what he's doing and how he does it. So we put together a whole course, you guys. It's, what we do, 5 modules?
5 modules.
5 modules, each around 30 minutes, so it's a ton of content that really go into detail. Maybe you can tell them a little bit more of how much in depth we went through the video course.
Yeah, in the video course, we went over all the principles in quite a bit of depth, and we drilled down through some of the concepts. Tried to make it easy for coaches to take it, even a single module, go to their athletes the next day and be able to apply something. And really get a feel for how you could actually coach the exercises, and if you're an athlete yourself, you should be able to do the exercises. And the reality is, what we've found is that even if you don't do the exercises 100% correctly, but you understand the principles, you'll start to actually move and make the adjustments because you'll realize and understand why the movement isn't working. So we've got things to build explosive power. We have exercises using med ball to build speed and endurance, just general endurance, and really a coordination and sequencing of movement. So no matter where you're sort of trying to move your body through space, you can use this and create what we call a really good default or instinctual movement pattern for whatever sport you're playing. Obviously for Howie, because he's a baseball guy, we would take the principles and modify them for his sport. If I'm a golf guy or track guy, I'm going to modify use the principles but modify the technique with an understanding that the coaches that are experts in that area will actually be able to use the principles and work with the technique that they're already using.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. And I was looking through my library, and I really, I've got hundreds of books, and I really can't find anything that's anywhere close to the level of, breaking down the biomechanics of how to use med balls properly and how that movement will translate into other sports.